Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jeremy, founder of QuickMail.io.
And this is Amar with ZenMaid. And today we are going to be talking about the hot topic for 2020 and 2021, remote working. Jeremy and I have both been running companies remotely since 2013,
14.
2014,
Yeah, 2014 for me.
uh, and well, yeah, 2013 for me. And so, yeah, we're going to be talking about our experience doing that, some of the differences. We'll probably touch on, nomadic like lifestyle as well. And yeah, should be a good one. Jeremy, what's up?
Yeah, it's funny you're mentioning 2020, 2021. A hot topic is like, yeah, for us, it was like, yeah, we've been working, remote for a long time. And suddenly everyone think like, oh, the hell, we can work remote. And
Yeah,
yes, you can. And then the next topic is immediately like, but holy hell, we have no tools for that. And it's like, well, yes, you do. It's like, and then, oh, how do we hire? And it's like, well, and it is just like whole bunch of things like people are discovering, last 2 years.
yeah. I get that. It's funny because on the last recording that we did, we were talking about like in-person meetups and stuff, and
Yeah.
I have people that meet me and we're just running this remote company, and they're like, oh man, like that's crazy. Like how do you make it all work? Like, isn't that really challenging? Like, well, like we've never done it any other way, so like I don't really know what you mean by that. Like, is what really challenging? Like it doesn't even occur to me.
Yeah,
So
I would still want to put a small disclaimer in a sense that as an employee, because I've been employee for 15, 16 years, and I've always worked, in the office. What was the joke? Sorry, Emma, I missed that.
yeah, I said you sucker.
It's true. Took me a long time, Um, but you also work in an office as well, right? Did you work as an employee remote, or it was also like always in office?
It was always in office, and then I had like one remote working day, like a week that I could work from home, and they took that away very soon before I quit. That may or may not have accelerated my decision to quit that final job and get started on ZenMaid like full time, but let's just say it didn't help.
Yeah, I see that. Well, I worked for probably like 13 different companies, something like that. I stopped counting after 10. But basically, they were all, at a place located somewhere, and then I had to effectively commute. And the commute, I mean, I used it for listening to books, business books, or, like just train myself, right?
Yeah.
But I do understand at some time, it was very tiring. And so you can't be always productive on a train when you're taking the train or the car, even worse. When I was taking the car, actually, I was learning Japanese. It's like it was, just some recording, like repeat this after me kind of thing. And it did work. Actually, my Japanese improved drastically, years and years. But yeah, so let's talk about that. You're fully nomadic. I'm like half. No, I'm not nomadic at all. I'm like I'm settled somewhere, but I'm fully remote, right?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before.
Yeah,
You're location independent. You spend a
that's
lot
right.
of time in the same place because you're like based somewhere, but you can like if we wanted to, we could meet up somewhere like for a week. So I mean,
Sure.
we're going that direction. That we literally are sending over money today to lock down a 1 year lease here in Chiang Mai. I was telling you about that before, where we had stayed before, and so we're about to be more location independent than truly nomadic, but I have been nomadic since 2015. So for about 6 years or so, we've just been like constantly on the move, never really staying anywhere for longer than 90 days.
Cool. So in this episode, what I'd like as a personal takeaway is how to manage to make it work for people who actually want to do the transition. And the other
Yeah.
thing is, what do we think the um, disadvantages are, right? Because I don't think it's all rosy working, remotely. There are plenty of challenges and plenty of things I personally don't like as well. And I valued more, when I was working as an employee somewhere. So commute, I think no one really misses it, even though I was using to, I was using them to actually do something useful. I don't think I miss them. Do you miss commuting, Amar?
Um, No, but I missed some aspects of it, right? That it was actually kind of like a nice part of my daily routine that, I was meditating every single day because it's what I would do right when I got on the train, that before I would turn on any music, turn on any podcast, I'd committed to doing like 15 minutes on the train ride, right? And so there's some things, but the whole thing is nothing about that had to do with the commute, right? Like I can do that now. I have way more time than I ever did when I was like commuting. I just don't do those things.
But this is an interesting thing is that when we're working and commuting, the commute is actually the door between one part of your life and the other one, right?
That's a good point.
So when I commuting, I start, shifting my mind, and you have whatever, 15 minutes, half an hour, hopefully not more when you're commuting, to actually switch your mindset to like, okay, right now I'm like fully in work. I don't get, other sort of distraction of life, hopefully, and in order to be most efficient. But happens as well when you come back. It's like, okay, now I'm like fully going back to, the other side of my life, and then I can commute more. Where as remote worker, it's more like you're expected to sort of like always sort of like be online, and it's more like blurry. It's like 5 minutes is 5 minutes, you can stop whenever you want. So there is this sort of like blurriness. And yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I definitely think that the boundaries are a little bit different. I mean, I think it's just two different ways of looking at it, right? That I think the other thing with remote work is that there are times where employees won't be working for like maybe an hour, but then like they make up for it by staying late, like later or whatever, right? And it allows them to be more flexible with their days. It does really ask that employees are more like always on in comparison to when you're in the office, right? You leave the office and most people are offline or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely pros and cons with it. I can say obviously that I very much prefer the freedom that comes with being remote. That we don't really track people's hours as long as people are solving our customers' problems, at least on the support side. We're happy, they're happy, it all like works out nicely. But yeah, I
It
mean,
does.
you make some good points there.
It does come also with self-discipline. I know that some people actually don't really like working, on their own. And a good example, actually, your wife actually tweeted something about like, I'm looking forward to go back to Chiang Mai, right? Chiang Mai.
Yeah.
Yes, got it. I'm looking forward to go to Chiang Mai because Koh Phangan is a much more relaxed, atmosphere, and it's harder to sort of like motivate yourself to sort of work. And definitely, whenever I go to Japan, it's like even when you go into Starbucks, everyone is working alone silently, and then just actually, working like frantically, and it's just like so much easier to just like, okay, well, let me work as well, kind of like fit in into. You're not going against the current.
Jeremy, this is why you take vacations to places that make you feel
That's
like
right.
working more.
That's right. Last time I was in Bali and I was like, holy man, it's like 2 hours to get a freaking meal. It's like, come on, come on. I got work to do. And everyone's just like super relaxed, super chill. Where you go in Japan in 10 minutes, you can have one of the best meal and that's it. You can go back to work. So yes, you're right. But that means like effectively when you are physically in the same office with other of your coworker all working, you can, have, I think, a boost in productivity. I don't believe in, people saying like, oh, well, I'm alone and so on. I believe that you can be more productive in an office than you can be, working remotely. Sometimes for some, specialties, right?
And I agree with that. I just think, when if you're looking at this, if you're listening to this and you're a founder that is, I guess sort of considering like this decision, I really like to have a balance of the two where it's like you give everyone like remote like options, I guess, but you try to spend time in person with people like where possible. And we found that to be a really good like combination. Of course, the pandemic completely ruined that. But
Yep. Yep.
yeah, I've definitely found that like, if I can meet my CTO who's like currently in Bulgaria, if I can meet him 2 times a year, that time, because we've gotten better with it and because like we're good with strategy and sort of lining up like our schedules now, we can like get a lot of the strategic work and bounce a lot of the ideas off of each other in like a 1 week period, and then we get the freedom to like to be where we want. Sometimes, you know, we're going to do things together in Thailand, sometimes we'll go like our separate ways and everything, but it allows both of us a ton of freedom while still giving us like the benefits of both remote work and like in office like kind of working, right?
I absolutely love it. And I think this is so crucial. Your type of work, you know, will
Mm-hmm.
benefit sometime where you're together and sometime where you're not. And I
Yeah.
think this is really, really crucial because I don't like any of the camp that say, you know, in office is much better, you know, full stop kind of thing, or like, you know, remote is much better. Full. I think it's a mute point. It's like it depends on what you want to do. If you want to all brainstorm together and build relationship, like, you know, be friendship potentially as well, but you know, deep
Yeah.
relationship and so on. There's no replacement for like in person. Let's just go together. Let's brainstorm together. Let's realign our strategy together. Let's think together. All of that is much better in person. And so you're gonna have to find out, like, if you go one way or the other, you're gonna have to find strategy to alleviate the other one. Like, for example, in office, they're gonna have to find strategies to get people to build without being disrupted too much.
Mhm.
But if you're remote, you're gonna have to find strategy on how do we actually connect people, and so they kind of communicate and exchange, and you know, and so it's no, you know, one size fits all really.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know. Just focus on the good sides of both, you know? I think that's really just like the best thing to do. It's like there's good things about both of them. There's some drawbacks, but some of the drawbacks, like, yeah, they they're worth it in a lot of cases. One thing that I think is interesting that some people, yeah, may not like think about. So if you're considering going nomadic, but there's a lot of indie hackers right now that
Yeah,
I
let's
met
do
that
that.
were in
Let's
like
talk.
college, for example, right? So for ZenMade, what we have, I mean, we have 25 people on the team, but you know, including agencies and contractors, but essentially people that we
Do you,
communicate with
do you
on a
get a
regular.
group discount when you move your whole team to Koh Phangan or to Chiang Mai or other places? Do you get a
Not
group
really.
discount?
No, no, unfortunately not during these times. But yeah. So we've got a bunch of people, but the whole thing is that most of them are not nomadic, right? That when you look at it, it's really me and Alex that are nomadic, and the rest of the people are just working remotely. That most of our team are settled, you know, particularly our US based team. You know, they have families, right? Like they're settled and living in the United States somewhere. They're not like moving around. And so what happens for me is my schedule changes pretty drastically whenever I change continents. And so I'm always the one having to adjust. So that's why, you know, our calls have sometimes been at midnight for me locally, the mastermind calls that you and I are on like every single week. Then
Yeah,
when I go
sad.
back to the United States, then all of a sudden they're at like 6 a.m. or something, right? They're like really early. And I'm used to changing locations and shifting my sleep schedule to kind of fit the calls. Now, a lot of people would not do that. I've always just seen that as like a price of like, you know, just kind of like living the life that I live. I feel like that's the least that I can do to keep it convenient for my team and not force us to reschedule every single time I move like somewhere new. And so most of our meetings are designed so that I can be in Asia, Europe, or the US. But I think that might be something that's different from a lot of people that have like remote companies. Of most of the time, the people at the top are the least flexible in their schedule, where for me, I'm like the opposite, right?
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I guess it depends. Well, that's interesting. Your hypothesis that the more at the top, you know, the less flexible you are with your schedule. I don't see it this way. So I'm like trying to figure out like where does that come from? Like what makes you think that? Oh, that's not
I've
something I
always
experienced. Yeah.
I think it's because like the folks kind of at the top of any organization are usually going to be the most booked with like the most meetings or have the highest value on their time. So it's like when they say like, okay, I can meet you at like this time,
Mm,
like you know, that like everything kind of shifts around that, right? Whereas I wanted to keep everything consistent with the teams that everyone else could get into a really good rhythm. And I don't care that it throws off my rhythm,
me
but it's
too.
more
Yeah.
important. Like I feel like my role is to keep the rest of the team on rhythm. And like, you know, that's kind of how I see all of the improvements and like everything in the business getting better day by day.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. Is it like servant leadership that we are like practicing instead of effectively just, the sort of like status game, like, hey, I'm the boss, so therefore everyone should align.
Yeah.
That's interesting because we obviously have, I see the company as its own sort of like entity. And so therefore, whenever people are telling me, we're working there, can we be flexible with the hour? Most of the time I say yes, but you have to have like 2 to 3 hours at least overlap with the company's, time zones or, opening time in a sense. So at least there is a point where everyone in the company can communicate at a certain time.
Yeah.
And it could,
Well,
yeah, sorry, you can jump on that one. Maybe just after we can effectively just give some tips and tricks on what worked for us. How do we actually made that remote work? Mhm.
yeah, definitely. Okay, so yeah, I can just start with literally like kind of the point that I was about to make over like about like what you were just like what you're just saying is one thing is I think that too many people are married to the idea that like kind of your work schedule is going to be the same at all times, and how do you keep that schedule the same while moving around and working like remotely. And what I've found is I try to take advantage that like when I'm in the United States, I can spend a couple of months being more like essentially customer centric, right? That I can like pick up
Yes.
the phone, I can call people and I can get them on the lines when they're having the problems. I can hear what's happening to them in the software in their own words. When I go to Asia, that's when I'll tend to do like more like UI UX work, right? That's when I tend to do like kind
The
of
builder.
deeper work
Mhm.
system, right? And so the whole thing is that there's literally times where, like again, when I'm in the US, if I'm assisting the support team, I'm on support live with them and I'm like chatting with them all the time, right? When I'm in Asia, it's the exact opposite. And I only overlap with them for like 1 or 2 hours. And so the feedback that I have to give them is very, very different. And so essentially, I focus on higher level problems when there's less overlap of, okay, how can we systematize this solution within support? And when I'm in the US, I might be coming back to them and going like, hey, this might sound nitpicky, but change the wording here from this to this, and
Yeah.
here's exactly why.
That's your
And I
training learning opportunity as well, right? That's your opportunity to influence the culture all the way some of the stuff are approached. And I think this is such a critical point, like whenever, and of course because your customers are primarily in US. If your customer were primarily in Australia, then obviously that would change the dynamic. But if your customers are primarily in US and you move to Europe, you're going to have like half your time to build, half your time to actually do customer, interaction. If you're like 100% in US, then yes, there's chances that you're going to be, on time when your customer are online. And so therefore your shift is going to be customer centric. But here's the kicker is like when you're effectively in Asia, your customers are there when you're sleeping. So you're going to have like 100% of your time almost to be on the builder side. And this is why I always like often go to Japan, because in the morning when I wake up, it's like, okay, I address some of the few problems that happened during the day. And then the rest of the day is like, holy hell, it's just building. And so I can like focus on, moving the product.
exactly, yeah.
Which
So,
means as a founder, you have an obligation to relocate based on where your product problems are, or where your problems are. Is it on a
oh,
product? Is it on a customer?
I found that to actually help. Like I've done that in the past of like deciding whether to like leave the US or stay for another month or two. Oftentimes came down to like to time zones and stuff. So it's funny, but it's definitely true. Like it's definitely true.
Great. So what tool helps you achieve this for you? Like what tool does support your business, or what did you actually find the most useful?
Well, I mean, I think Slack is obviously like the best thing, right? That just like, I mean, that's the tool that we're using, for all of like of our communication, other than Zoom for occasional calls, and we're jumping on those. So all of the teams have like weekly calls. So like that's a good example. There is I'm never on the support calls unless I'm in the US because they happen at 3 in the morning my time. So that's one of the few calls that I just can't make. But I'm not in charge of support anymore. So I don't have to be there. I just get notes the day after and I can see the recording on double or triple speed if I want to. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would say Slack like that. It has to be Slack.
Isn't that a funny name, by the way? Because you don't want any slacker in your company, and yet they call it Slack.
Yeah, it is kind of a funny one for sure. I'm not sure how they came up with that. I'd be interested know that story.
Someone was slacking. It's like, yeah. Anyway, yeah, pretty much the same tools. And I think it's important to for me the tool is just a mean to an end, right? Like, um, I'm focusing on what culture do I want in my company? Like, how do we want to approach problems, decision making, how the company should operate without me, and
Yeah,
still sort of like follow my sort of guidelines or the the way why I created this company so that we don't, have random decision making or random arbitrary things when I'm not here, and when I'm here, it's like different. So we try to have some sort of uniformity, and I don't think the tool really helps with that. It's just there to feel a need, and that's really how I approach tools. So, everyone who thinks like going remote, the answer, or is a tool or something like that, is usually not true. Like, look at UMR, you're just using like Slack and Zoom, and it's pretty much what I use too, right? And then beside that, we're using any tool that we would use if we were anyway co-located in the same place, like support tool or emails. It's just like it would be the same tool anyway. We probably
yeah,
wouldn't use Slack as much, but we may even be using Slack if we were like co-located in the same place, just
yeah,
because of the asynchronous nature of communication. Or we could
yeah.
just use emails too. So
Yeah, with my job in San Francisco before I started ZenMate at User Voice, I felt like 80% of the company communication, more than 80%, was going through HipChat because that's what we were using back in like 2012 or whatever,
feel
2013.
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. And we were using that, and it was, there were quite a few sales conversations that would go on in the sales room because I was on like the sales team. But when you looked at it, the vast majority of my communication with people outside of that was actually through HipChat around like the rest of the office. And so I think a lot of people don't realize this. A lot of your communication already is kind of like this way. But I mean, there's definitely some things that you give up by not having, like, I don't know, FIFA in the office. I'm still sour about that one. But good news, I'm settling in Chiang Mai, so I'm buying a PlayStation 5 or whatever it is.
What are you
And
gonna do after with this? You're gonna try to resell it?
no,
Keep
I'm
it
just getting a
living.
year lease on it. Like, it's just renting. I'm not buying it.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
plenty of differences between purely nomadic or versus remote. Like, I'm remote, but look, I got my gears, right? I got my camera, I got my lighting, I got my mic, and so on. And it's obviously more difficult to sort of like accumulate some sort of like gears when you're actually nomadic. What do you got in your bag, Amar? Like, what are some, obviously, clothes, but do you got like a laptop? Most likely, I would guess.
Yeah, I mean, I travel insanely light. I mean, like, we're about to start probably collecting more stuff because we're settling down. But I mean, I have like two bags that both are technically carry-on, and honestly, it's pretty much clothes, like my laptop. I guess I have like my wife's drone in there, and let's see what else. Her tripod, because she does some
Oh,
photography
interesting.
stuff, and then, like, other than that, it's just yeah, essentially just like a couple like electronics, right? Couple pairs of shoes. I mean, nothing crazy, right? Like, everything I own fits into two carry-on bags.
What do you think? Um, Actually, I don't know that's probably not a good question. The way I was about to phrase it, but
Yeah,
do you think will discourage people to do this type of lifestyle versus just settling and then working remotely?
yeah. I mean, I think that for a lot of people it can be quite lonely. I think that there's a lot of drawbacks like to that, right? That I feel quite blessed to have a good network. I'm very like
Yeah.
extroverted. I have a lot of friends online and invested a lot of time into communities that were for like entrepreneurs that were location independent, and I think that helps a lot. But I mean, that's why I'm settling in Chiang Mai. This is where most of my friends like come in and out of every single year. It's easy to come into, it's easy to get to, and to like just be in for a couple of weeks. And so that's very much like deliberate, right? But
That's a fair point. It's probably harder to develop a relationship with a local if you're just like coming in for 1 week and so on. And so obviously you will tend to go to hub or like hubs in if you're a writer, maybe in writer hubs, although you may like, solitary stuff, but you see the point is like you will find the hub of your tribe or your community, and then you will just fly more often there, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. And it's just a little bit more per year, but if everyone comes in once or twice a year instead of other places, then you get to see them. I mean, honestly, a lot of people don't like changing environments. So Jeremy, you know that I'm like ADD, right? That
And I
I
like
go,
routines.
yeah, right. Um, so I definitely find that changing venues, changing environments, changing locations helps like my creativity a lot. But then I'm also very much like I don't really get into deep work all that much. I'm always bouncing from one task like to another, and so that very much kind of fits my personality. A big reason that we're settling down, like you mentioned earlier, was my wife putting out like a tweet about us settling down in Chiang Mai is because for her she needs like a stronger routine, right? That she's not like as ADD as I am. It doesn't help her to be changing locations. I'm not gonna lie. Like right now, I'm struggling to figure out what my like gym and jujitsu schedule is going to be, and I'm having to go through like 4 or 5 different gyms and like figure out what their schedules are, and if I want to sign up for 1 or 2 or whatever, depending on like this kind of like stuff. And I'm having to do that every single place that I go. Whereas now I finally get to do it. I get this set up and then like I'm set for the next year, right? And a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people want to have that very, very set routine and not be changing it and figuring out all of these things from scratch every 30 or 90 days.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. So why would actually want people to do it? Like, what are this, such great advantages? And it's
Well,
obviously not for everyone, of course.
yeah, definitely not for everyone. I mean, there's like the cost of living that depending on where you are when you're listening to this, if you're living in an expensive city in Europe or in the United States, there's a good chance that you could save a ton of money by deciding to live this lifestyle. At the same time, though, if you just committed to going somewhere and settling down there, you'd save like even more money. So like that argument is like, maybe a bit weak, right? There's a lot of new experiences, right? That I think that a lot of people take it for granted that that maybe others know exactly where they want to live. For me, I've traveled to a lot of places around the world. If you had asked me before I started traveling in January of 2015, I probably would not have told you that Chiang Mai was going to be the place that I just wake up like feeling the happiest and like, able to kind of be like my best self or whatever. That came with a couple years of traveling and experiencing different places, of spending time in Europe and in the United States and other places like in Asia to be able to know that, right?
Yeah.
So there's also just that, you may be confident in what you think but going out and like living this lifestyle for maybe a year may open your eyes to a lot of different things. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it really just comes down to new experiences and like what that means to each like person, right? Like I like being able to go into all these like different jujitsu gyms, right? Like everyone does it differently, and like I enjoy that. When I've trained at the same place for 6 months, it's boring.
It could be that, some gym don't accept, people who just come for a month or a week, right?
Yeah.
Like I know, like for example, if you come into Switzerland, which is like a country where a lot of things are, slow going, and everything is regulated and everything like really well, thing. It's really hard for people to just come in, hop in for just one cool thing and then just go away, kind of thing. So it could actually effectively cut you off from some opportunities, or in some countries. And it's an interesting point you're making about like saving cost, because usually I find myself that whenever I travel into those sort of like exotic location, I take some more luxury type of things, and because it's Airbnb or because it's like short-term rental, then obviously ends up like anyway costing me the same amount of money, kind of. So
Yeah.
otherwise you live
Yeah.
in a bad place with scorpions.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on how you want to do it. If
Yeah.
if you want to be a badass, then like you choose the scorpion route, right? But if you want to be,
Plus, hey, you got a pet when you come back. It's like quite nice.
yeah,
Free
yeah.
pets.
But I mean, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about my experience because, like, like I was traveling for 3 years before meeting like my wife, and in those 3 years, I was definitely bumming it for a couple of those years. And even when we met, we weren't like doing like all that well. And so most of our decisions were about like, what can we afford? What's kind of within our budget? And we kind of knew how much we could afford before we went and looked for stuff. And now things have really like changed a lot, where, I think we will be more like you, where if we're going somewhere, we're probably going to pick one of the nicer hotels and be like staying there. But,
Makes
we
sense.
do want to keep it local, like some places. And, I feel like even here in Chiang Mai, we're getting like a nicer apartment, but I wouldn't say that like we're not going to be, kind of experiencing like local stuff and everything. So,
Got it.
yeah.
All right. Yeah, we could also touch on political stability of the country. Like, I think at some point, I think you've been
Yeah.
in. Well, have you been in any country that was like politically pretty unstable and become kind
I
of
mean,
risky? I remember one occurrence, I think.
well, Thailand has had like 7 military coups or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
since like 2012 or 2013. So I'm pretty sure I've been here during multiple of those, but I never like noticed anything. Apparently, they don't really affect people too much. Like it's just every now and again, some like different soldiers walk up and like power changes hands like in theory, but doesn't really.
Sri Lanka, you've been to, I think.
Yeah, we were in Sri Lanka. Yeah, we were
Was that
there
just
actually.
before it became unstable or something like that?
I don't know when Sri Lanka would have become unstable, but there was a terrorist bombing that happened like
Yeah.
exactly 1 week after we had been there, and like literally, I was drinking at the bar one floor up from where like this bomb like went off. That they bombed, I think, 2 luxury hotels and 3 religious services, or like vice versa, and that was on Easter Sunday. And like I had left the week before after being like at that bar or whatever. So.
Hey, but
Um,
equally, I've been to Strasbourg in France, which is like technically, supposedly a very developed country, France. I'm spitting on them because I also, come from France. But and then, just the next day, I think I left, and then the next day there was like a terrorist attack in the very same road I was in, like with someone. I think he was either
yeah.
knifing people or shooting people. So
Yeah,
you're never really safe when.
those are close calls that we would have rather like avoided. So here's one that I'm sad that I missed. When I was at the World Cup, and this is a totally random listener story, right? Like I don't know what to tell you other than that. It's nothing to do with our actual topic. But 2006, I'm in Germany for the World Cup, and I watched one of the games, and then I go to this like local German square, and we sit down, and they've got this massive like projector that's projecting like the next World Cup game. It was during like the group stages or whatever. So we're watching one of the games. We leave, and we're driving the next day to some other stadium like an hour away. We turn on the local news when we sit down at the hotel, and at the same, like you could see the table that we had ate dinner at, some German fans started throwing iron chairs at Brazilian fans, like literally like throwing like iron chairs. And so me and my friend, we were like 15 at the time, and we were like, that is awesome. We wish that we'd been. Now I'm like, no, I'm glad we didn't take an iron chair to the face, which is maturity, I guess. But
I guess, yeah.
for a long time, I was like, oh man, I wish I'd been there.
I'm not sure how much mature you are. I remember you in Belgrade, wearing a sort of shirt of a different team, rooting for a different team, and almost getting, kicked in the
we
street.
we almost got mugged over that.
That's right.
That'll be a story for another episode.
Yes, I think we need to stop it here.
We got to save that one. We've got some good stories. So.
If you want more stories from Amar, do remember to subscribe. We're going to do this fun thing every week. So subscribe to our channel. And if you want to know more about Amar, just go in Twitter. It's just Amar, all one word. Like you really need to spell it. ITS. It's just Amar. And for me, it's Jay Chatelain. So send us DM.
And if you're anything like me and you don't like taking orders from Jeremy, go subscribe.
All right. Make your own choice, and we'll see you next week.
All right, sounds good. See ya.
Bye.